Before you open another chart, before you click buy or sell, before you convince yourself that this next trade is the one that's going to fix everything or prove something or make you feel better about yesterday, just stop for a moment and listen. I know what brought you here. You're tired. Not just physically tired from staring at screens, but emotionally exhausted from this cycle you've been trapped in. You make a plan, you break it. You promise yourself you'll be disciplined, and then you're not. You know what you should do, but when you're sitting there with your hand on the mouse, something else takes over. And afterwards, you're left wondering why you did it again. Why you took that trade you knew you shouldn't take. Why you broke the rule you swore you'd follow. This video isn't going to teach you a better entry technique. It's not going to give you a new strategy or a secret insight into market structure. What I want to do is help you see what's actually happening in the moments before you take those trades you regret. Because the problem isn't out there on the charts. It's in here, in the space between seeing an opportunity and deciding to act on it. And until you understand what's happening in that space, nothing else matters. Most traders think their problem is technical. They think they need to learn more, analyze better, find clearer setups. But if you're honest with yourself, you already know that's not it. You know what a good trade looks like. You know what your rules are. The issue isn't knowledge. The issue is that in certain moments, under certain emotional conditions, all of that knowledge becomes irrelevant. Something else takes over. And that something else is what we need to talk about. Think about the last trade you took that you immediately regretted. Not the one that lost money necessarily, but the one where even as you were clicking, you knew it wasn't right. You knew it didn't meet your criteria. You knew you were acting from emotion, not from your plan. But you did it anyway, and the moment after you entered, there was this sinking feeling, this quiet knowing that you just made a decision you're going to have to live with. Why did you take it? And I don't mean the story you told yourself to justify it. I mean really what was happening inside you in that moment. Were you bored? Had you been sitting there watching the market move without you and felt like you were missing out? Were you frustrated from an earlier loss and trying to make it back? Were you feeling confident after a win and thinking the rules could be bent because you were in the zone? Were you just restless, unable to sit with the discomfort of doing nothing? This is what most traders don't understand. The vast majority of bad trades aren't technical mistakes. They're emotional reactions disguised as trading decisions. You're not actually trading the market in those moments. You're trading your internal state. You're using the act of taking a trade to regulate how you feel, to relieve boredom, to fix frustration, to maintain a feeling of control, to prove something to yourself. And the market doesn't care about any of that. It's just going to do what it's going to do, but you've now put your money at risk not because you had an edge, but because you needed to feel differently than you were feeling. Let me ask you something. How many of the trades you've taken in the past week were truly based on your criteria showing up? And how many were based on you needing to do something? Be honest, because there's a massive difference between a trade that meets your plan and a trade that meets your emotional need in the moment. One is professional. The other is just expensive therapy. Here's what happens. You sit down to trade with good intentions. You have your plan. You know your rules. You're calm, focused, ready. And for a while, maybe you execute well. You pass on marginal setups. You wait patiently, you're doing what you're supposed to do, but then something shifts. Maybe the market gets quiet and you start to feel bored. Maybe you take a small loss and suddenly you're not as calm as you were. Maybe you see price moving and you start to feel like you're missing something everyone else is seeing. And in that shift, in that change in your internal state, your relationship to trading changes. You're no longer looking at the charts to find your edge. You're looking at the charts to find relief from what you're feeling. And when you're in that state, you'll see trades that aren't there. You'll convince yourself that marginal setups are actually good ones. You'll tell yourself that this one doesn't quite meet your criteria, but it's close enough. You'll rationalize. You'll adjust your definition of what counts, all so you can take action. Because taking action feels better than sitting with the discomfort of your current emotional state. And here's the thing. Sometimes those trades work. Sometimes you take a trade you shouldn't have taken, and it goes in your favor, and you make money. And that's almost worse than losing. Because now your brain has learned that trading from emotion can be rewarded, that breaking your rules can work out. And that makes it even harder to resist the next time the urge shows up. But over time, over hundreds of these decisions, the math catches up. You can't consistently profit by trading your emotions. You can't build a sustainable edge by using trading as a way to manage how you feel. And the exhaustion you're experiencing, that emotional burnout, a lot of it comes from this, from constantly battling with yourself, from knowing what you should do and doing something else, from the gap between who you want to be as a trader and who you actually are when the pressure is on. So what do? How do you stop this pattern? It starts with recognizing what's actually happening, with developing the awareness to notice when you're about to trade from emotion instead of from plan. And the key moment, the moment where everything is decided, is right before you click. In that moment, there's almost always a feeling, an urge, an itch, a sense of urgency or excitement or need, and most traders just act on it automatically. They feel the impulse and they click. There's no space between the feeling and the action. It's instantaneous. But what if you created space? What if every single time you felt the urge to enter a trade, you paused, just for 10 seconds, just long enough to ask yourself one simple question? Am I about to trade my plan, or am I about to trade my emotional state? That pause, that moment of self-inquiry, is where everything changes. Because in that pause, you have a choice. You can still take the trade if you want, but now it's a choice, not a reaction. And most of the time, if you're honest in that moment, you'll realize you're about to act from emotion. And if you can see that clearly, if you can acknowledge it without judgment, a lot of the time the urge will pass, the compulsion will lose its grip, and you'll be able to choose differently. This isn't about forcing yourself to be disciplined through willpower. Willpower fails under stress. This is about building awareness, about developing the capacity to observe what's happening inside you without immediately acting on it. And that's a skill. It's not something you're born with. It's something you practice, consciously, deliberately, every single day. Think about urgency for a minute. That feeling that you need to act right now, that if you don't take this trade, you're going to miss it, that the opportunity is going to disappear. How many times has that feeling led you into a bad decision? How many times have you rushed into a trade because you felt like you had to act immediately, only to realize moments later that you entered at the worst possible place? Urgency is almost never your friend in trading. Real opportunities don't disappear in the time it takes you to think clearly. And if they do, if a setup only exists for 5 seconds, then it probably wasn't a high-quality setup to begin with. The best trades, the ones that actually work, they give you time. They set up, they develop, they wait for you. You don't have to chase them. But urgency makes you chase. It makes you feel like every tick of price movement is a tick of opportunity lost. And that feeling, that sense of desperation, it clouds everything. You stop seeing the market clearly. You start seeing what you want to see instead of what's actually there. And you click, not because the trade is good, but because you can't tolerate the discomfort of potentially missing it. And then there's boredom. This one doesn't get talked about enough, but it might be the most destructive emotional state in trading. Because boredom feels harmless, it doesn't feel like fear or greed, it just feels like restlessness, like you're sitting there doing nothing while the market is moving and you should be involved somehow. And that feeling, that need to be active, it leads you to take trades just to feel engaged, just to have something happening. But trading isn't about staying busy. It's not about constant action. Some of the most profitable trading days are the ones where you do almost nothing, where you wait and watch and pass on dozens of opportunities because they don't meet your specific criteria. And then, when your edge finally shows up, you act decisively, with conviction. Not because you've been sitting there desperate to trade, but because you've been patient enough to wait for the right moment. Boredom makes you impatient. It makes waiting feel like failing. It makes you think that if you're not actively trading, you're not really working. But that's backwards. The work isn't in the clicking. The work is in the waiting, in the discipline to do nothing when nothing is the right thing to do. And if you can't sit with boredom, if you can't tolerate periods of inactivity, you're going to keep forcing trades that don't need to be taken. Frustration is another one. You have a loss, or a series of losses, and now you're frustrated. You feel like the market is working against you, like you're getting unlucky, like you just need one good trade to get back on track. And that frustration creates a need to fix what just happened, to prove you're not wrong, to recover what you lost. And when you're in that state, you're not looking for good trades. You're looking for any trade that might make you feel better. This is revenge trading, but it's more subtle than the dramatic version people usually talk about. You're not necessarily doubling your size or throwing all caution away. You're just slightly less selective, slightly more willing to see what you want to see, slightly more eager to get back in. And that slight shift, that small lowering of your standards, it's enough. Enough to take trades you wouldn't normally take. Enough to act from emotion instead of from plan. And here's what nobody tells you about this. Every time you act from emotion, even if the trade works, you're reinforcing a pattern. You're teaching yourself that it's okay to trade when you're not in the right state, that the rules are flexible, that your plan is more like a suggestion. And over time, that erosion of discipline becomes your baseline. You stop even noticing when you're breaking your own rules because you've done it so many times, it feels normal. So let me ask you this. What's the cost of just one more trade? What's the cost of taking that setup that doesn't quite meet your criteria because you're bored or frustrated or feeling urgent? You might think the cost is just the potential loss if the trade doesn't work, but it's bigger than that. The real cost is what it does to your discipline, to your self-trust, to your ability to follow your own plan tomorrow. Every trade you take from emotion makes the next emotional trade easier to take. Every rule you break makes that rule less meaningful. Every time you act on impulse instead of intention, you're moving further away from the trader you're trying to become. And you might not notice it immediately, but over weeks and months, you'll notice it in your results, in your consistency, in the way trading feels harder instead of easier, in the exhaustion that comes from constantly fighting yourself. Now think about the opposite. Think about what happens when you choose not to take that trade. When you feel the urge, you recognize it for what it is, and you decide to wait. You close the charts. You walk away. You let the moment pass. What's the cost of that? There isn't one. Well, maybe you miss a trade that would have worked, but you also avoid a trade that might have been a mistake. More importantly, you strengthen your discipline. You prove to yourself that you can resist the impulse, that you can choose your plan over your emotion. And that builds something. It builds self-trust. It builds the capacity to do it again next time. Profitable traders aren't the ones who never feel the urge to trade impulsively. They feel it just as much as you do. The difference is they've learned to create space between that feeling and their action. They've learned to pause, to question, to choose. And over time, that space becomes natural. It becomes automatic. They don't have to fight themselves as hard because they've built a habit of awareness instead of a habit of reaction. But you have to start somewhere. And it starts with today, with this trade, with the decision you're about to make right now. Are you about to act from your plan or from your emotional state? Are you clicking because your criteria are met or because you need to feel something different than what you're feeling? And if it's the latter, if you're honest and you realize you're about to trade from emotion, what happens if you just don't? What happens if you choose to sit with the discomfort instead of medicating it with action? I know that feels almost impossible sometimes, especially when the urge is strong, when you're sitting there and every part of you is screaming to take the trade. But here's the truth. That urge will pass. Emotions are temporary. They rise, they peak, they fade. And if you can just wait, if you can sit with it for even 60 seconds without acting, most of the time the intensity will decrease. The compulsion will loosen, and you'll be able to think clearly again. This is what emotional regulation actually means in trading. It's not about eliminating emotions. It's about not being controlled by them. It's about being able to feel frustrated and not revenge trade, to feel bored and not force trades, to feel urgent and not chase, to feel confident and not overtrade. The emotion can be there, but it doesn't get to make the decision. Your plan makes the decision. And you choose to follow your plan regardless of how you feel. And I know some of you are thinking, but what if I miss the trade? What if I pause and by the time I'm ready to act, it's gone? Then it's gone. And that's okay. Because there will be another trade. There's always another trade. The market isn't running out of opportunities, but you can run out of capital. You can run out of emotional energy. You can run out of the mental stability required to do this long term. And protecting those things is more important than catching every possible move. The traders who last, the ones who build careers that span years or decades, they're not the ones who traded the most. They're the ones who traded the best, who understood that sometimes the most professional decision is to do nothing, to close the laptop, to walk away, to let the day go by without forcing anything. And they're okay with that, because they know that trading isn't about activity, it's about execution. Execution requires clarity, and clarity requires you to be in the right state. So before you take another trade, ask yourself, am I in the right state? Is my mind clear? Am I calm? Am I following my plan? Or am I trying to fix how I feel? And if you're not in the right state, if you're emotional or tired or reactive or desperate, the most intelligent thing you can do is step back. Not because you're giving up, but because you understand that trading from that state is going to cost you more than just money. It's going to cost you discipline, progress, self-trust. I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm not going to give you a checklist or a set of rules, because you already know what you should do. You've always known. The issue has never been knowledge. The issue is whether you're willing to do it, whether you're willing to choose the long-term path over the short-term relief, whether you're willing to sit with discomfort instead of trading it away, whether you're willing to trust that doing nothing right now might be the best trade you make all week. So sit with that for a moment. Before you go back to your charts, before you open another position, before you convince yourself that this time will be different, just sit with the awareness of what's actually happening, of what drives your decisions, of the cost of acting from emotion versus the value of acting from intention, and then choose, consciously, deliberately, with full awareness of what you're doing and why. Because that choice, that moment right before you click, that's where trading actually happens. Not on the charts, in you. And the sooner you understand that, the sooner everything else starts to change. This is Trader's Mental Edge, where trading starts in the mind.